So much of what we do is based on the foundation of trust, from how we connect with our families and friends to how we live with our neighbors. But what happens to that trust in a surveillance state? One where our phone calls are listened to and our actions are watched. Joining us now to help answer that, in Minneapolis, Minnesota, Bruce Schneier. He is author of Liars and Outliers, Enabling the Trust That Society Needs to Thrive. And Bruce, as I welcome you to the program, I think maybe the best way to point out the importance of trust in a society is maybe for you just to tell us how you got to your studio in Minneapolis today. Take us through it.
Well, I started out at home, of course, with my wife, got into a car and drove here. And you think about the amount of trust just in those things alone. There are hundreds, thousands of other cars on the road. I park in a parking lot, walk out. There are people on the street I'm passing. I'm trusting the manufacturers of the cars. I'm trusting the traffic signals I'm following. I'm trusting the other people, right? You know, nobody jumped up and attacked me and stole my money. Walked into here, the studio. Someone else tried to take my driver's license in exchange for a badge. Exercising trust there. I'm sitting here. There are people around me working. You know, in some ways, the amount of trust we engage in our daily lives is astronomical. And you know, the fact that no one has jumped me and attacked me is nothing really to remark about. But if we were a bunch of chimpanzees, that wouldn't have happened. Right? We're the only species that can get away with trust at this large scale. And really the fact that we never even really think about it is a measure of how effective it is.
Well, it's interesting. We often think of ourselves as a cynical, mistrusting, nervous society, particularly about those we don't know. But as you've just described it, trust is a bit like the oxygen in the atmosphere. We don't necessarily see it, but we just kind of depend on it to get through our day. Is that right?
And society would collapse without it, right? We're constantly trusting people. I don't grow any of the food I eat. I'm trusting that other people are going to grow it and make sure it's not poison and hand it to me. I'm trusting the water, the power, electricity, internet. I mean, so many things. And for society to grow at this scale, you need trust. And yeah, we might be mistrustful, but it's really around the edges.
In our evolutionary history, how did trust develop and operate?
It's an interesting question. I mean, we are a trusting species, but we're not the only trusting species. There are lots of social species on the planet. Certainly there's a lot of trust in all mammalian species. You go to the insects. And a lot of cases, trust comes from the fact that related individuals are siblings. Or you go into an ant colony and they're all sisters. They're all genetically related, and that's where that trust comes from. In most mammalian species, trusting groups are family groups. And even in primates, a lot of trust comes from the family bond. Humans are really the only species that regularly trust strangers. I mean, I'm going to fly tomorrow to Boston. I'm going to go into an airplane filled with strangers, into an airport filled with strangers. Trust people I've never met. Trust brands. Right? I'm not really trusting the people of the airline. I'm trusting the airline itself. So amalgamations of trust. How it evolved is slowly and carefully, but it evolved to such a degree that we can do things as a species that no one else can.
Can you point to a moment in history where it went from, I only trust the people I know and have intimate contact with and may share DNA with, to, I have a broader trust in society because?
It's hard to pinpoint the moment. For the most of our history, we lived in small family groups. The change happened when things started to scale. And what's interesting is that we were able to scale past our natural biological limits. And there's been studies of primates and brain size. And the natural group for humans is about 150 people. We, of course, scale to much larger institutions. Right? You can think of corporations. You can think of countries. And we do that by trusting people we don't know personally. Right? And to make that work, we have edifices of trust. Right? We have government that steps in and says, well, even though you two don't know each other, we're going to pass a bunch of laws that require you to act trustworthy. I mean, a great example is I'm going to land in Boston tomorrow and get into a taxi. I mean, why should I trust a cab driver? Why should he trust me? Well, there's a lot going on there. That cab driver is licensed, right? That car is inspected. I'm a passenger at an airport, and there are things that I'm likely to do. There's a lot going on in society that allow us as strangers to trust each other, not completely, right? We're not going to go into business together. We're going to engage in this very stylized transaction, where he's going to drive me to my hotel and I'm going to pay him. So trust isn't all or nothing. We trust gradually, we trust slowly, and we trust because society gives us all these edifices that we can rely on.
True enough, but society also puts other pressures on us to either trust more or less under given circumstances. Can you talk about that?
Well, I mean, and that's certainly true. Sometimes we're in a sense required to trust. I mean, the government will do things in our name, and there's not a lot we can do about that. So sort of coming part and parcel with government is we have to trust them to do things that they're not going to tell us about. And government can also facilitate less trust. If the court system starts failing, you think of countries where there isn't a honest court. I mean, that makes it harder to do business because you can't rely on the contracts you sign. Or a country that's run by warlords. You can't rely on the police to enforce order because they're taking bribes. They're acting in their own interest. I mean, a high-trust society is very valuable. There have been great studies around the world of how much it costs a society to be low trust. And it's extraordinary. And you can't trust strangers. You can't trust businessmen. Your country's not going to thrive because there isn't the government underpinnings to allow you to trust people. Right? I mean, trust only happens if it goes bad, you have recourse. If you don't have recourse, you're less likely to risk things. So it goes both ways.
Well, of course, one of the reasons we've wanted to talk to you is because of something that's incredibly topical these days, namely the amount of trust people either do or do not have in their government to, in essence, spy on them, or I guess more technically, run the national surveillance agency, national security agency. How do you think we ought to be regarding that relationship of trust?
Well, this is actually very interesting. I mean, we are, in a sense, trusting institutions to protect us from nation-state threats, terrorist threats, threats that they really can't talk about in detail. And in order to do that, we need faith that they are going to do their job fairly without unduly harming us. Right? The NSA's job is to spy on United States enemies. And so moreover, United States is part of the Five Eyes, which you could think of as the rich English-speaking club, the former British colonies, United States, Canada, UK, Australia, New Zealand. And those countries trade a lot of surveillance information. And the question we have to ask when they do their job is there enough transparency and oversight? Right? One of the ways you make trust work in this environment is you have oversight. You know that there is some sort of oversight. So, for example, we're going to trust the police to invade our privacy, to investigate crimes. We do that. The United States, other countries have a warrant process. Right? There are rules that the police have to follow. And that's oversight. There's also transparency. We know what they're doing, maybe not in detail, but we know the kinds of things they're doing, so we can, as society, decide if they're doing it properly. The problem with the NSA right now is there's no transparency, there's no oversight. So while we are forced to trust them, we have no evidence that they are trustworthy, and there's no recourse that they turn out not to be trustworthy. And what we're learning through all these Snowden leaks is that they have been systematically violating our trust in ways that are surprising to us and in some ways abhorrent. And that's really what this is about.
I hear you, but in a post-9/11 world, do you think that most of your fellow countrymen have been prepared to forego some of their cynicism and trust in these institutions like the NSA? Because frankly, they're terrified of the possibility of another 9/11 type incident happening.
Well, thankfully, things have calmed down since then. Right? I mean, the terror that people felt after 9/11, which is exactly what the terrorists wanted, right? That's them doing their job properly, has subsided, and we're a little more reasonable when we start talking about different threats. We're better at balancing them. And it turns out, at least in the United States, when you see the opinion polls, people are pretty much divided. I mean, there isn't that fear that just transcends reason. Right? When people are scared, they'll just give up anything to feel better. You know, people aren't that crazed anymore. People are more rational. And we can more rationally evaluate the different trade-offs we're making in terms of security. Right? No one's saying that we don't need security. The question is, and I believe it's a good one, is how do we get security while maintaining the liberties that make our society great and not being forced to live in a police state. Right? We want security, but we also want privacy and freedom and all those good things.
I wonder how old a problem this is, because clearly today we have technological abilities that no one could have imagined even, who knows, 25 years ago on how much snooping these institutions can do. But does this kind of dilemma, how far back in history would it go, do you think?
I think it goes back to the beginning of history. I mean, more recently, we've seen this in the United States, the FBI under J. Edgar Hoover. I mean, enormous amount of overreach and power that was reined in. We had the Red Scare and the power overreach there that was reined in. The NSA in the 70s was reined in. I mean, this thing seems to ebb and flow, which makes a lot of sense. Right? People are going to be more or less scared. Right? The trick is going to be to rein in the NSA in a responsible way. And those dialogues are starting. We're seeing lawmakers introducing bills. We're seeing broader debate among politicians, among academics, among policy people on how we can do this. I think it's ancient. I mean, right now we're living in a free society. You go back further into history, and the government always did things in their self-interest against the people. Right now we think our countries are more moral or more ethical, and we expect the people to ultimately be in charge.
Well, I guess we didn't know about it back then, because clearly before, say, the Vietnam War, before Watergate, before the Pentagon Papers, people's trust in their government was much higher. And I think we've got some numbers here that we want to share with you and our viewers to amplify on that. Control room, I'm at image number 1 here on the Pew Research graphic. There we go. Public trust in the United States government from 1958 to the year 2013 right now, and we see a squiggly line going down, 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 starting at 73% in 1958 and ending up at about 26% of the people today who, in the United States, trust their government to do the right thing. Now, tell us about what dangers that low a level of public trust in the government does to what we hope is a healthy, thriving, democratic society.
Right. When trust in the government gets too low, the government stops being able to do its job. What's interesting about that graph is it's going down from the 50s to now, but I bet if you went back even further, you'd see it go down, go up. You would see these long cycles. My guess is about 80, 100 years, you will see trust cycles. When trust is at a low, then the legitimate activities of government get questioned. Right? In the United States, there are people who are questioning the government's ability to deal with health care, to deal with climate change, to deal with agriculture, to deal with actual serious government issues. And that mistrust, I think, is at the core of a lot of the stalemate in Washington, that people just don't trust the government. They don't trust the other party. They don't trust their own party. They don't trust institutions. And we do need government. I mean, government does a lot of good things for society. When trust gets too low, government has trouble functioning.
Bruce, they just revoked your Tea Party membership. You can't go saying things like we need government. Am I right?
Yeah, unfortunately we do. I mean, and we need all things. We need government, we need corporations, we need the press, we need civil society. A lot of the trust we get comes from these institutions who are a little bit antagonistic, maybe a lot antagonistic, working with and against each other. And to get that process is how society works. And when one piece gets too powerful or too unpowerful, then things go out of whack.
It feels, though, as if, and I appreciate your position that if you look at broader cycles through history, it does go up and down, but it feels we're at the bottom of a trough right now in this latest cycle, and it's hard to see at the moment what could possibly get that trust number back up? Do you think, particularly with all the NSA revelations and the spying that's going on right now on the American public, is there anything that could get the public's trust level in its government to go up?
I think in the short term, things are pretty bleak, and I am pessimistic. Long term, I'm optimistic. I mean, this thing does go in generational cycles. You're having new people coming of age who just don't have the same life experiences as I might, right? Who's someone who's 30 years older, 40 years older. And that churning of cycles is how trust comes back. So in the long term, yes, I think there's going to be more trust in government. But in the short term, we are at a low, and it is hard to see what can change in the next months or even couple of years that will change that.
Does a president have the ability to change this trust equation in a dramatic way? Any president?
I think a president has the ability to lead the people and make some changes. I mean, it's hard, especially in the United States. The political system is so antagonistic and so moribund that it's hard to see what an individual can do. But I do think a president can lead, and that there are things they can do to increase people's trust. Right? That being said, there will always be a group of people who will be extraordinarily mistrustful of a president of the other party, and there's not anything they can do. But I do think that the dialogue in Washington is set by the leaders, and the president, as one of those leaders, can work to change some of that dialogue.
But from north of the border, yours looks like, anyway, a pretty 50-50 country right now. Admittedly, Obama won with more than 50% last time, but it looks like roughly a 50-50 country. And if the bully pulpit of the presidency can't restore that institution of trust, what other institutions in your society can get those trust numbers up?
Well, it's not institutions. It's society itself. People will become more trusting. I mean, 10 years ago, people were more scared, more willing to give away liberties to government to keep them safe. Here we are, 2013, and that's less likely. The institutions didn't do anything. Time passed. Reason set in. People became more balanced in their view of the world. I mean, and that's going to happen. Right now, we're at a trust trough, and that will rise, and it'll be feedback loops. People will get more trusting, and in response, institutions will be a little more trustworthy, which will make people more trusting, and then that goes on, and the trust numbers go up. So it's not like there's a magic bullet, something you can do, you turn a knob, and suddenly everybody's more trusting. This is a slow process requiring a lot of feedback between the people and the institutions.
Okay, having said that, let me finish up on this. The former director of the NSA, Michael Hayden, said this in late July. He said, "Give me the box you will allow me to operate in, and I'm going to play at the very edges of that box." Now, that doesn't sound like somebody who wants to increase the trust factor in society. And beyond that, given the increasing pace of technological change in your country, and often the ways legislatures are always following, trying to catch up to those technological changes, it looks like a potential widening trust gap is actually on the horizon. What do you think?
So I definitely agree with that. And here's where technology throws a wrench into everything. Right? What Hayden is saying, and he ran the CIA, is that he's going to operate within the box of the law. But he'll go to the very edges. And another quote, he said, he might get scuff marks on his shoes. Right? He's really going to be aggressive in getting to the edges of that box. Technology changes the box. Right? More things become possible. More things become easy to do. Right? Technology gives intelligence more capabilities. And as you said, laws lag. Laws are much slower than technology, and laws will always lag what is technologically possible. So what we're seeing, and we're seeing it in a lot of areas, not just the NSA, corporations do this too, with regulatory laws. The laws were written 10 years ago. Technology changes. There are things they can do that follow the letter of the law, break the spirit, because the laws are obsolete, and they're going to rush in to fill all those gray areas of the box. Meanwhile, legislatures catch up. The box keeps growing. There are more gray areas. And now you have lobbyists, either corporate or government, saying, hey, don't get rid of our capabilities, when in fact they rush to grab them in this gray area. I think that's going to make things very complicated because technology is never going to stop. It's going faster and faster. We need to actually figure out how to make laws that are technologically invariant, although this problem's never going to go away.
That's Bruce Schneier. His book is called Liars and Outliers, Enabling the Trust That Society Needs to Thrive. I trust, Bruce, that you enjoyed yourself on TVO tonight. I know that we enjoyed having you on.
Thank you very much.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.